Hello, K-Squid listeners. It's every other Sunday again, and you're listening to Sustainability Now, a bi-weekly K-Squid radio show focused on environment, sustainability, and social justice in the Monterey Bay region, California, and the world. I'm your host, Ronnie Lipschutz. California has created a program called Transformative Climate Communities, which, according to the program website, empowers the communities most impacted by pollution to choose their own goals, strategies, and projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and local air pollution. TCC is focused on making low-income urban areas more resilient, efficient, and responsive to housing, energy, and climate challenges. What does this mean on the ground? My guests today are Nancy Faulstitch, Executive Director, and Eloy Ortiz, Special Projects Manager at Regeneración, which, along with Monterey County, received a TCC planning grant in 2021. They've been leaders in this effort, and we'll talk about the planning process and what happens next. Regeneración is a Pajaro Valley nonprofit that builds bridges between residents and climate practitioners in local cities, counties, and at the state level. Nancy Faulstitch and Eloy Ortiz, welcome to Sustainability Now.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Nancy, why don't you start by telling us about Regeneración and what it does?
Sure. So Regeneración Pajaro Valley Climate Action formed with a group of community members around 2016 after operating kind of loosely in the area to start raising awareness about climate change and how it was affecting the Pajaro Valley. And since then, we've worked with many different partners and really have been focused on centering community voices in local decisions, that we want to make the local policies and plans and projects from our region really relevant to and answering the needs and the desires of the people on the front lines of climate change here, which is a lot of the people in the agricultural community, low-income communities, mostly Mexican heritage, Spanish-speaking communities. That's kind of where we started. We've been delighted to, again, partner with cities and counties and many other organizations in the region to start working on actually making the transition off of fossil fuels and then helping our community adapt and become more resilient. As the climate changes, as we speak, we are in a weird heat wave in winter. This is still winter.
Right. Hawaii is getting our rain, as it turns out. Regeneración and the Monterey County got a Transformative Climate Communities planning grant in 2021. Can you tell us what the TCC program is, what it's trying to do, who's funding it, what's been happening with it?
Sure. So the Transformative Climate Communities program is funded through the Strategic Growth Council, which is a office at the governor's office at the state of California. And the goals of the program are really to reinvest into disadvantaged communities, uninvested communities, and build up infrastructure projects that can be leveraged to improve the environmental health, the health of community members, and economic benefits for those communities, which again have been disadvantaged, have been uninvested over time. And the uniqueness of the project is that Transformative Climate Communities, I'm going to call it TCC for the rest of the interview because that's a lot easier. TCC really empowers communities, funds groups like us that have existing relationships with both community members and other community partners, and can really focus on what the community needs and wants, and to identify or to make those connections between what the community needs and wants and greenhouse gas reduction projects that can be leveraged to, again, improve the health, wellness, security, safety of those communities.
What are a few examples of the kinds of things that would reduce climate impacts or emissions?
For this project, we've done community engagement over time. And again, so we're really focused on what the community wants and needs. And so things like housing, things like active transportation, which is like more bike lanes, or creating more resources for pedestrian safety, such as street lights, such as safer crosswalks, crossing signs, that more repainting and restriping roads, access to parks and green spaces, access to healthy foods. These are projects that the community wants, and in turn can be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the community. So, for example, if we're asking people to spend a little less time in their cars, we need to give them healthy and safe alternatives. We need to give them we need to provide, for example, bike infrastructure resources. We need to provide healthy crosswalks, especially here in the Pajaro area, which is where this planning grant is focused. There are people not following safe speeds on roads, fear of people not following signs of crosswalks. And quite frankly, there are faded crosswalks in a lot of places. So people in general are not comfortable walking to go to grocery stores, walking to go to public parks, letting their children walk to school in the morning and in the afternoon because of this lack of infrastructure for pedestrians. Accessing parks or creating more access to parks and nature here in the area can help people staying out of their cars and going to places like Santa Cruz, going to Monterey, and being able to relax and be access to open the environment here in their own communities. And of course, when we're talking about access to healthy foods, we're talking about a community that travels back and forth over the Pajaro River and, spending a lot of time in their cars. If they have more access to healthy foods in their own communities, can both be healthy as a community and as individuals and as families, and also reduce their time in cars. So the greenhouse gas impacts in this local community will be reduced.
Well, one of the requirements of the program, the TCC program, is that it be focused explicitly on disadvantaged communities. How are those defined? How are those identified? We know by sight and by sound, the hearing about it, who is disadvantaged, but how do you specify this? Because I know also that boundaries have to be specified pretty clearly. So what are the requirements?
So for this project and for many grants across the state does require that we use what's called the CalEnviroScreen website, or CalEnviroScreen tool. And right now they're in their fourth iteration of the CalEnviroScreen tool. And what that tool does is it aggregates a lot of the environmental impacts, a lot of the social impacts that are occurring in the area. They get a lot of their data from the census and from other departments who are collecting information. This particular project, as I mentioned before, is unique as it is focused on a multi-jurisdictional area. And just to be clear, when I say that, I mean that the planning area of focus is located both in the county of Monterey, Pajaro, the unincorporated county of Santa Cruz, and then also parts of the city of Watsonville. So when we looked at the CalEnviroScreen data, we saw that the two census tracts that make up the majority of the planning area focus are in the top 20% overall for the state in things like high pollution burdens, high exposure to diesel particulate matter, high exposure to pesticides, cleanup sites, high threats to drinking water and groundwater, and lead from housing. So these are communities that have been highly impacted by pollution from many different elements, both transportation, agriculture, and if you just go into Pajaro, some of the light industrial work that's done in the area. And so these are communities that have this high burden, and this is the state's opportunity, or this is an opportunity for the county of Monterey, for the city of Watsonville to invest back into these communities.
So just to clarify then, so the EnviroScreen looks at income, at ethnicity. Is that one of the considerations, or is it defined otherwise?
Language isolation.
Air pollution, water quality.
It's really interesting to look at if anybody in the
Yeah.
audience wants to take a look at it. Again, you can search by put in a city, it'll go down to the census tract level and gives you a lot of different data, again, by the census tract level. And it's, it is very interesting to see different pockets in the state where they rank in terms of different kinds of pollution burden. Even things like exposure to lead in housing is included in there.
Yeah, well, both Santa Cruz and Monterey counties are very diverse. The northern half of Santa Cruz County is quite wealthy, as is, I think, the western part of Monterey County, right? Monterey and Pacific Grove and the like. But the other parts are fairly poor.
Right. It's one of the things that makes living around here so difficult for people because there's such a high cost of living and you have such very low income populations next to, pretty middle or high income populations and it drives the price of the housing up. And so for people on the lower end, it results in overcrowded conditions and, lack of kitchen access and housing because people are living so close together and difficulties meeting basic needs. And again, this program can kind of holistically approach an area and meet some of those basic needs in a combination of projects that are vetted by the community, asked for by the community, that will reduce greenhouse gases, but also produce these, multi benefits, again, of benefiting people's health and well-being now.
You're listening to Sustainability Now. My guests today are Eloy Ortiz and Nancy Faulstitch, both from Regeneración in Pajaro Valley and Watsonville. And we're talking about Transformative Climate Communities program, which is a state program that's providing development funds essentially to low income and disadvantaged communities. And Regeneración in Monterey County received a planning grant in 2021 to develop a larger implementation grant. I'd like to ask you questions about the bigger implementation grants. They're up to what, $18 million or $20 million, something like that? Yeah,
30,
$30
30,
million.
30
Okay,
million.
so even more. But they require a dollar to dollar match, right? So
Correct.
the local community has to come up with the equivalent amount of money. Can you tell us anything about any implementation grants that are being implemented, and what they're trying to do
You mean in other communities?
in other communities?
Yes. So over the summer, I was lucky enough to visit the Stockton to meet a few of the partners on their current implementation grant. And their implementation grant was a little different because it was partially funded over two rounds. So it didn't receive $30 million at once. I think it received $20 million and then another portion. So they've been working on their implementation grant for, I believe, 4 years. Again, their project was called Stockton Rising. I was lucky enough to visit what's called McKinley Park in the area. And so this was a park that was invested in and really developed to have more basketball courts. They funded, along with the city of Stockton, not just TCC. It was TCC dollars, and with city of Stockton dollars, they created a new swimming and recreational space, a basketball space, soccer. I believe a softball, baseball field in this park, which is essentially in a low income part of the city. um, the person we met there, who's from Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities actually has an environmental justice coordinator out
Hmm.
there in Stockton. Walked us over to his dad's home, which was just a couple blocks away from McKinley Park. And at the home, the TCC program also funded residents installation of solar panels and a backup battery for specific residents. And luckily enough,
Hmm.
the father of this person qualified for those resources. We were also able to visit a charging station hub located by by one of the local middle schools out there in Stockton. And again, these resources, I don't know Stockton very well, but these resources are invested in kind of the more disadvantaged census tract in the Stockton area. Other projects happening in Stockton, there was greenhouse gas reduction. There was workforce development for youth and formerly incarcerated individuals, energy and water efficiency appliances. I was able to visit Manila Rising, which is the workforce development element of this grant, which had done urban greening. They've planted 1,750 new street trees. And then reading from some of the Stockton website, they've also supported in distributing 6,520 basically boxes of food to families and school children. And then they've transformed part of the downtown area connected to this community with bike lanes and sidewalks and new canopy cover, among other things. There's a lot of other projects that were happening in the area, but TCC is really a suite of projects. So no TCC program looks alike because there are 13 elements. So again, when I say elements, that's like housing, that's active transportation, food, parks, 13 elements that a community can potentially apply for assistance with. So each community is just a little bit different.
Now, I'm curious, does the program support economic development in the sense of new industries in these areas, or is that not included?
It is included if it can be connected to greenhouse gas reduction and workforce development. I believe we can make the argument and potentially ask for funding for that. There's also there is a anti-displacement element. So we want to make sure that not only residents, but businesses, as these communities are being redeveloped, that businesses, that residents are not priced out of their own communities as these resources that are invested in these communities to better them.
And then a kind of a through line throughout the project is that it all really needs to be community driven, that there needs to be really meaningful and equitable community engagement throughout the process, showing, why are these projects being included in part of it? How are residents, weighing in along the way? And that's one of the things that's differentiated this program from other types of funding opportunities is instead of just the cities and counties who develop their climate plans and then say, okay, this is what we're going to bring to an area. This program funds groups that really have participated.
Just to note that under the now much reviled Biden administration, this notion of community engagement was central, I think, to every grant-making program. And my observation was that people struggled mightily with trying to figure out how to do that, that it was not so easy. And again, just a note that I did see something at one point about the Department of Energy funding research into how to engage communities that might be near nuclear waste repositories, which seemed to be a really hard climb.
Ronnie, if I can add just one thing to that. So this program, this California program, actually was taken as a model for the nation under the Biden administration. The EPA started a program that they called the Community Change Grants, and they had 20 million implementation grants, and then I think 1 to 3 million planning grants. And our area did apply and never got told if we were awarded or not because everything ended up pretty much being canceled. We know of some groups around the region that might actually get reinstated, but of course that's a whole other conversation and but this program was seen as a model and taken to the nation.
Yeah, I actually was participating in a grant like that in Minnesota. There was a first round, just for our listeners, there was a first round of projects that were funded. The second one never made it past the submission stage because of the change in administrations. And then the Trump administration has tried to claw back the money that was provided to those funded projects. And I actually don't know what the status of those might be. Well, let's talk about your planning grant. Okay, in 2021, you got a $300,000 TCC planning grant, which was to do the groundwork for a much larger grant, for an implementation grant. How did that proceed? I mean, first of all, how did you get involved in this planning process? And who else was working on it? Nancy, I'll call on you, Nancy.
Yeah, I can start with that. Just to go again a little further back, before Regeneración even formed as an organization, in 2015 is when this Transformative Climate Communities program launched. And I heard about that and I was like, that's what I want to bring to Watsonville. It just sounded perfect. It sounded like just the right kind of thing. Of course, at that point, we didn't have an organization. I didn't know what might be involved in going after these size grants, but had that in the back of my mind. And then I was fortunate, along with another woman from our area, excuse me, Ileana Ortega Brunetti, we were both part of a program sponsored by the Strategic Growth Council called Partners Advancing Climate Equity. This was a cohort that met for a couple of years, mostly during the pandemic. Incidentally, got connected to folks in Stockton and heard about their TCC project there. But coming out of that, the next round of funding was available, and Ileana and I decided to explore. Ronnie came to an exploratory meeting back then. We met with various leaders and decided to put forward a proposal together with the County of Monterey, who would be the lead on the proposal, the sustainability program at the County of Monterey. And again, as Eloy mentioned, this was pretty unusual to do a cross-jurisdictional proposal. They even doing anything in a rural area is still pretty new for the TCC program. I think one other place had been funded, but we met and worked on this proposal and got it in, and we were so fortunate to be funded. That's the beginning for me of a dream come true of many years of thinking about this type of funding. And Eloy, maybe you can add in other partners and then kind of what happened right after we got the funding.
Yeah, so the other partners on the application were the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, Ecology Action, and of course us, Regeneración, through our fiscal sponsor community initiatives. I should say we also had other in-kind partners, including the University of California's Department of Sustainability, or UC Santa Cruz Department of Sustainability,
No,
and
there's no Department of Sustainability. I think it
oh,
was
Sustainability Office.
sociology. I think. Oh, the Sustainability Office. Okay.
Sustainability Office. That's where Ileana was,
I
Ileana
tried,
Ortega
but didn't
Brunetti.
succeed. Yeah.
Well, we can work with you on that. And then we were actually funded a little bit by, or received a small amount of funding by the UC Irvine program called CAPECA, which is one second, Community Academic Partnerships to Advance Equity-Focused Climate Action, which provided a lot of resources and technical assistance in preparing community engagement type activities.
Mhm.
And so again, we received this grant. I came on to Regeneración in November of 2022. We were in contracting with the, or I should say, County of Monterey was in contracting with the state. We were Regeneración was in contracting with the County of Monterey. And come March 2023, which is about 3 years ago, there was a flood in the town of Pajaro, which of course is where this project is really centered.
Mhm.
So after the flood, there were a series, the County of Monterey actually hosted a series of similar planning meetings to what we were planning to do in terms of engaging with community about what the needs were of the community, talking about infrastructure, talking about how to use any funds from the state of California from the state. And then, so we had to think about how to differentiate this project from what the County of Monterey was had hosted over a series of months in terms of community engagement, in terms of learning from the County of Monterey meetings about how residents wanted to be engaged with around the community's needs. And so, we were particularly sensitive to the impacts of the flood on both sides of the river. In Pajaro, of course, people's homes were flooded, and they lost cars, they lost items in their household, personal items, expensive items. And many of them will never be made whole by FEMA or any other organization. The loss is just a loss for this community members. And on the Watsonville side, the Pajaro flood really impacted agricultural work, and so people were hurting and are hurting still, on both sides of the Pajaro River. So we just really had to be sensitive and sensitive to people's needs. We had to make sure that when we messaged about this project, that we messaged that it was a long-term visioning project, and we wanted to make sure that even though we were working with the County of Monterey on this project, that it was a little different from the County of Monterey community engagement meetings that occurred, after the flood event. So, I could talk a little bit more about the community engagement types of activities and how we engage with community in a moment.
You're listening to Sustainability Now. I'm your host, Ronnie Lipschitz. My guests today are Eloy Ortiz and Nancy Faulstitch from Regeneración in Watsonville and Pajaro. And we're talking about the Transformative Climate Communities planning grant that they received in 2021 along with Monterey County. And we're now just about to talk about about community engagement, what that means and how you went about doing that.
So one of the requirements of each TCC project that's funded is that we create a kind of a citizen oversight group. And our group was made up of community leaders and community residents. It was going to be a 10-member group. And prior to the flood event, it was going to be 2 residents, one from the city of Watsonville, one from the town of Pajaro, and 8 community leaders from nonprofits that service both Pajaro and Watsonville. After the flood, we pivoted to include a little bit more community voice and definitely more community events, because we recognize that the flood did 2 things. It uncovered a need for community engagement, and it created all these people who it provided a space for people to really advocate for their community, and we wanted to make sure that we created opportunities for those people who talked to newspaper reporters and who talked to media and who talked in front of their board of supervisors, could really build upon those experiences and continue to advocate for themselves and their community. So we created what was called the Community Climate Coalition, and it was made again of two residents from City of Watsonville, 2 residents from Pajaro, 6 members from local community-based organizations, including Casa de la Cultura, which is one of the the longest Pajaro-focused nonprofit in Pajaro. Positive Discipline Community Resources, where we really leaned on an employee who was a Mixteco speaker and a Spanish speaker, and we really leaned on her to help us create Mixteco resources and engage with the Mixteco community, Mixteco speaking community, I should say. Monarch Services, MILPA, Watsonville Wetlands Watch, and Ventures. So, I should say, out of all these groups, really only Watsonville Wetlands Watch is, working on environmental issues, and which was the goal of this project, to bring in other groups that aren't necessarily working on environmental issues or infrastructure issues, but recognize that there is a need for community voice in elevating community voice, highlighting community voice in those processes. This 10-member group was our North Star. They were helping us, guide us in our community engagement activities. They work with clients, constituents. They live in the community. We had them talk to their neighbors about issues related to everything we've talked about: infrastructure, food insecurity, access to parks. They were the people that were helping us both form our community engagement plan and actually do the community engagement work. As we mentioned before, Ileana Ortega Brunetti was our main facilitator. She was out of the Office of Sustainability at UC Santa Cruz. And, we also worked with Association Monterey Bay Area Governments and Ecology Action and the City of Watsonville and the County of Monterey. We had meetings with all of them, presentations with a number of groups that were working on transportation and social service issues and access to resource issues over a year-and-a-half process of monthly meetings and community events. Some highlights from the community events include what was called the Climate of Hope Fair. It was our first one, and that was in September of 2024. We had a number of partners, really focused. We really had a great engagement from UC Santa Cruz. We reserved a space at the Soma space in near downtown Watsonville. And we had about 150, 200 community members at the space over on a Saturday afternoon. And, we had partners there such as the Monterey Bay Aquarium, some of our, the Natural History Museum, the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, just a lot of groups that are doing environmental type work. And this was a different space than Earth Day, I will say. It was a space where people could learn about environmental and open space resources in the community. And the way we engaged with them about this project was unique. It was something we had talked about with our Community Climate Coalition, and that was, introducing this idea of greenhouse, like why are we doing any of this, and why are greenhouse gases important? And a few people said, like, you don't even have to discuss greenhouse gases with residents. And I think we wanted to try to think of an approach that could work with residents, explaining why greenhouse gases are important and why we want to reduce greenhouse gases. And the idea that we developed, and really it's still in development, is thinking about greenhouse gases as pollution. And there's pollution that we can see. There's pollution that residents see on a day-to-day basis. There's litter on the streets. There's pollution, there's smoke coming from cars. There's visible, and the idea we wanted to express is that there is visible and invisible pollution. The visible pollution, such as litter, we can just pick up, put in a garbage can, and it's taken to a garbage dump, and it still exists, but it's kind of in its in one place. Whereas invisible pollution, such as the greenhouse gases, the smoke coming from a car, you see it for a moment and then it kind of disappears. And we don't think of it necessarily. But just because we don't think of it, it doesn't mean that it's gone. It is having a lasting impact on this community, and it's having an impact globally, and it's causing it's causing climate change issues. And as we talk to them about this idea of visible versus invisible pollution, we also introduce the ideas of how do we decrease some of our invisible pollutions? How do we decrease that in a way that can support you on a day-to-day basis, support you in terms of your needs around housing, in terms of your needs around access to healthy food, access to parks. And we had this wheel that people spin. Perhaps you've seen them at some community engagement events. You can kind of fill in the wheel with different topics, and when you land on something, you get a prize, or you're asked a question or something. And we had this wheel where we filled in the themes that we had developed over time with our community group. And so those things were housing, those things were access to parks, all the things I've mentioned before. Because if we ask people what their needs, what are your primary needs, right? In this on the Central Coast, what are people going to say? They're going to say
Money.
housing. Yeah, they're going to say money. They're going to say housing. They're going to say jobs, right?
Right.
And so we wanted to get past that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we had people spin the wheel, and where they landed, we asked them about, like, okay, so you land on safe streets. What kind of resources do you need in your community to feel safer on your streets? And we took down their responses. And we did ask them to after that, we did ask them to elaborate if they wanted, talk about anything else, such as housing and jobs and things like that.
Nancy had her hand up.
I was going to say one of the first actions that Regeneración took as an organization was to conduct a community survey. So this was way back in 2017. We developed it, kind of carried it out over the winter, and then presented the results at our first Climate of Hope forum in spring of 2018. And on that survey, we specifically asked, what environmental problem is most important to you, or do you think is the worst? And litter is what came up as the most the highest priority for people. And I just think of that all the time in relation to what Eloy is saying, is that the visible pollution is really matters to people, and they're really disturbed by it. They don't want to be living in a dirty community. But if you ask, we ask people on that survey, it was the first one done in the area around climate change, other things related to the climate, and it didn't come out as pressing a need. And I think it is because of the invisibility of it. So I think learning to talk about it instead of, with the jargon or with, things that sound too scientific can intimidate people, but trying to make it really concrete that basically what is happening with climate change is it's pollution, and we can't see it, but it's still there. And it's really affecting everything about life. So just wanted to share that throwback to that early survey.
Yeah. And the Trump administration is busily trying to proclaim that it's not, that carbon dioxide emissions from various activities are not. And that, of course, is not something new. You're listening to Sustainability Now. I'm your host, Ronnie Lipschitz. My guests today are Nancy Faulstitch and Eloy Ortiz from Regeneración in Pajaro and Watsonville. And we're talking about the Transformative Climate Communities program, a state program that is essentially funding activity and work in low-income communities to address climate change through a variety of different methods and tactics. Now, you're about to embark on the much larger project of writing an implementation grant. And what is that? I mean, what will that involve? That's it's as we said, it's a lot of money, and of course, it does require that match, which is again going to be difficult. But how are you going to go about this? And this is due in fall, right? This has to be submitted sometime in the fall. So, what's your process?
Yes, final draft application will be released in the spring, due in the fall. Not sure about the dates. As far as the process goes, this is going to be a all hands on deck situation, I think. We will be working with the County of Monterey Sustainability Program. Cora Pantarot has been a great partner to Regeneración, and uh, through the years on this project. The County of Monterey has been a great partner. We're looking forward to working with the Office of Supervisor Glenn Church, and getting their support on this grant. Also working with our partners at Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, Ecology Action, so forth. Um, I think one of the issues that we will have in developing this application is meeting the requirement of creating that transformational aspect in a 10 square mile area. So just so for this project, it's going to be a larger area of focus than the planning grant. And so we can go up to 10 square miles, but we can't just, just because the community wants more housing, and maybe we have a site for housing, doesn't mean that the state will give us money for the housing aspect. We really have to meet the requirements. Each and every one of these different kind of sub projects has different requirements. So for the housing element, if we were to apply for that, we'd have to meet the requirements of affordable housing, sustainable communities requirements for housing,
Mhm.
which we've been talking to a partner who has a site in the Las Lomas area, which is right south of Pajaro, and unfortunately, they might not meet those requirements at their site for housing funding. So
Why
it's
not?
going to be.
I'm just
Um,
curious. Why not? What's the?
I think they're not close to public transport. I think one of the elements is
Oh,
being near public transportation, and
uh-huh.
they're not. The site where they're looking to invest is not near public transportation. So there's going to be a lot of push and pull like that. Like who can where can we how can we create a zone, this 10 square mile area that really feels like the investments over these 5 years really creates a transformational process in the community. We are going to start hosting a series of meetings over these next few over the whole process. And again, with the County of Monterey Sustainability Program, and this is new for us. This is our first planning grant, and this will be the first time partnering on an implementation grant. But we will be creating the series of meetings with potential partners to hash out all the things, all your questions, because we don't have the answers at the moment.
I mean, how much detail do you have to go into in these grants? I presume you don't have to provide blueprints. On the other hand, you have to provide some kind of, I suppose, guarantee, right, that if funded, this project will actually move forward. So, what I've written a slew of grants, nothing quite this ambitious, I think, and so I'm just sort of wondering what needs to go into that. Nancy?
Yeah, we will definitely be leaning very heavily on the County of Monterey as the lead on this project
Yeah.
and probably to provide the majority of grant writing for it. We don't have the experience on our team of writing this level of a grant. Again, the guidelines are being finalized. They are making some
Yeah.
changes from the last round to this round, particularly in terms of what needs to be like ready to go on day one. I believe the first year of this 5-year implementation grant would be considered more like project development stage. So some of the environmental compliancing or permitting or things like that, I think could still be happening in that first year. But it's going to be quite a dance to fit together both the matching requirement of leveraged funds, projects happening in this rural area of a certain size during a certain time frame that can, accompany whatever the elements are that we want funded specifically by the TCC. So yeah, we're going to embark on forming a group that'll be meeting regularly. We expect that we'll be able to have updates shared out to people that are interested about how that process is going. And Eloy, I thought that you might mention that we have potential sources of support from a couple of areas. One is a program that Eloy is just accepted into, and one is that we are still alumni members of a cohort that formed under the Biden administration. It was called the Justice 40 Accelerator program. So we were fortunate enough to get accepted into that. And so we do have some basically staff support that might be able to help us with elements of shepherding this project through the implementation proposal development phase. And then the other is a cohort that Eloy has access to.
I and Regeneración were recently selected to be a fellow for what's called the California Climate Leaders Fellowship, and that's a program through the Center for Community Investments in collaboration with the California Endowment. They will be providing support, both mentoring and technical support to me. It's a year-long program designed to create capacity to bring in more climate funding to representatives from communities in California that are similar to Watson-Vale Pajaro, what we've talked about, communities that have been uninvested over time. And so a lot of that work will be around leveraging the TCC grant and also planning. The TCC program will be very competitive this year. We're not a shoe-in. We're not guaranteed anything just because we have a planning grant. So being able to pivot if necessary to look at other funding sources. The other thing I'll mention is that not all the community's needs are part of the TCC program. So we did express to our coalition, we did express to community members as we talked about this project throughout the years that even that we would be looking for alternate funding sources as we could to really follow up on what the community has said they both need and want.
Okay. Can our listeners get involved if they're interested, and what should they do to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think a first step could be reaching out to Eloy, and he can provide his contact information. Maybe we can get it out on the radio website as well after the show, in case there's people that do want to receive regular updates or potentially even join that working group. I mean, certainly if there was somebody out there with grant writing skills or project management, sort of project development skills, we're trying to build our capacity as an organization in those areas. That would be incredibly helpful. And then, of course, just investing in our organization, it would be super, super helpful. An investment in Regeneración is an investment in the whole community and in carrying out community vision. So if people are moved to make a donation of any size, that would be wonderful. Because, unfortunately, you don't generally have funding to write proposals. It's like the funding comes in after the fact. So all of our staff time in this next month of planning and developing this is really not covered.
Well, listen, Eloy Ortiz and Nancy Faulstitch, thank you so much for being my guests on Sustainability Now.
Thank you.
Thank you
This is
so
great.
much for the opportunity.
You've been listening to a Sustainability Now interview with Nancy Faulstitch, Executive Director, and Eloy Ortiz, Special Projects Manager at Regeneración, which along with Monterey County received a Transformative Climate Communities Planning Grant in 2021. They're now preparing to develop a larger implementation grant submission, which is due this coming fall. Regeneración is a Pajaro Valley nonprofit that builds bridges between residents and climate practitioners in local cities, counties, and at the state level. You can find out more about Regeneración at www.regeneracionpajarovalley.org. There's information about the state's Transformative Climate Communities program at sgc.ca.gov/grant-programs/TCC/. And finally, you can contact Eloy Ortiz at eloy@regeneracionpajarovalley.org. If you'd like to listen to previous shows, you can find them at ksquid.org/sustainabilitynow, as well as Spotify, YouTube, and Pocket Casts, among other podcast sites. So thanks for listening, and thanks to all the staff and volunteers who make K-Squid your community radio station and keep it going. And so, until next every other Sunday, Sustainability Now.